Hello! In this video I thought I'd show different ways to use reverb and delay on various different instruments and some vocal samples on this track that I've just knocked up, because they're so broad in what they can be used for, and a lot of people get very confused because there's lots of different types of reverbs, different types of delays, and different reasons to use them for different instruments. And I'm using plugins that aren't stock with Logic, so bear with that. And obviously I do recommend these are tools that I use all the time, so I would recommend checking them out. I'm not sponsored or anything like that, so it's easy for me to demonstrate what I do actually use. Cool. So here's a track that I've made just now. It consists of a simple Apple drum loop, which is pretty dry, some chords, and yeah, these are all Apple loop samples. So guitar, a real simple little guitar lick, and then this is a more rhythmic guitar, an abstract sort of vocal tone, sounds a bit like a waltz or something, and then this weird peaking opera vocal from Apple loops, and then a bass line. Cool, so starting with the drums, I've chosen a drum loop that's quite dry, but I'm going to demonstrate a room reverb that I use all the time for drums and other instruments. Get a sense of a real space, and this is a really good room plugin by Acustica Audio. Now they have a suite of plugins called N4, which I've invested in a while ago. These are high quality sample drums where they've actually used their own proprietary technology to kind of sample these spaces, and I'm using a studio room, which is a real studio called Dig. This is what it sounds like. That's everything full volume, full mix. And what I generally do is turn the volume down on the fader on the send, and then blend it in to a point where I like it. Now with room reverb and a lot of these effects, subtlety can go a long way. You can have moments in songs where effects like this are really cranked up and they're much more dramatic, but I'd say 99% of the time having subtle things like this, it's just adding something that is, in a way, not massively perceptible until you take it away. Like this is with it. Take it away. So yeah, I will generally have a room just tucked in the mix like that. But when you take it away, or when sounds are really, really dry, on headphones you're not getting any room reverb, any actual natural reverb, so things can feel very flat. And so just a touch of room reverb like that really gives it depth, but you don't have to add too much for it to have the desired effect for your ears and your brain to think, okay, this is in a room now, this is in a space. And I recommend using good quality reverb. There are lots of other room reverbs, Logic's got some, and they're all good. In the case of what I'm using, I've just invested some money in something that's a higher standard, and I think it's really worthwhile. So onto the keyboards now. This is just a simple thing, very dry, using TL Audio Juno plugin, which is excellent. Very flat, very dry. Now my goal here would be to make those sound wider and make them feel like they're really around you. There's a couple of ways of doing that. Now actually I know that within the TL Audio Juno plugin it's actually got a chorus effect built in, so let's hear what that does. Now that might be enough actually, so I could just turn that on and that's fine. But if you're using a sound that hasn't got a chorus built into it, what I recommend doing is having something like a pitch shift delay, a very, very fast delay. And that's what I've got here, set up with the Eventide H3000 effects unit, made it onto tons of records in the past. It's a bit of a vintage piece of gear that Eventide have done a good job of modelling. So I've got it set up on micro pitch shift. It's doing a very similar thing to the Juno chorus, but slightly more interesting way. So this is the keyboard. If I start to send it to that sound, you can hear it. And that's the full signal sent to that. Now that's actually using a very short delay and a pitch shift, so it's just detuning it slightly and then blending that in, and then with the slight delays as well, that gives it all that width basically. It tricks the ear into thinking that these sounds are coming from around you. And then I would always have blend that signal in to taste, so just that's dry. Do a blend. I like that. That's one way of using delay to widen a sound. Delay and pitch shift. Cool, now let's go to the guitar, first guitar track here, which is the sort of riff. It's down, down. It's just doing that every now and again. Again, very flat, very just in the middle. There we go. We've got the loop. One way to make this feel like it's in a real space, again, since it's that same room. With guitars, if they are in a busy mix and you want to really hear them, I always would recommend doing a hard pan left or right. So I just pan one guitar right, one guitar left. Now that's cool, but you might not like that being all the way to the left just on its own. One other cool thing I like to do is use a spring reverb, which I'm just going to set up now on a bus. Then I've got a spring reverb I love, which is by Arturia, a nice kind of modelling of an old reverb unit. 100% wet. I'm going to go mono, and it's a short setting. This is basically, I'm going to pan this reverb the other side to the guitar, and then fade it in a little bit. That's it, high in the mix. I might opt for a thicker sound, maybe something like this. Now, this isn't really meant to be that loud in the mix, I'm just showing you how it is. I would just dial a tiny bit of that in, just enough to make the ears not totally hear it ostracized out on the left in a bit of a weird way. Sometimes things being super panned like that isn't amazing, you just need a little bit of balance. So that's the little thing I'd use reverb for. That's the technique I've learned from, I think, listening to how one of the engineers mixes John Frusciante from the Chili Peppers guitars on some of the records they've made, where they don't use very much reverb in their music as a rule generally, but this is a subtle way of using it where it's not overt. And that guitar still sounds pretty dry, but the reverb's doing its thing. Now the next guitar here is also very dry. And I would want to make that stand out a bit. If I contrast that with the keyboards are quite wide, the guitar's panned. Now this other guitar is playing a different role. It's a very rhythmic thing. Something you can do with this kind of flat, dry sounds is, again, a little bit of width, which can be added using modulation. But in the case of using delay and reverb, definitely send it to a room. And it's tucking in underneath that keyboard part. If we listen to these keyboards and the guitar together. If I send that guitar to another widener I've got set up, have a listen to this. This is the Echo Boy. It's doing a similar thing to the H3000, but in a different way. It's got a detuning thing going on, but it's moving. That's got a modulation going on, and I like that on guitar because the guitars, you want the guitar to feel like it's coming from one place, but if you've got something modulating, it just creates a little bit of movement and helps it differentiate itself and pop out of the mix a little bit. So that's with the effect. If I make it more dramatic, I mean, it's actually pretty cool when you have it up full. Solo this, and in some cases for like a solo or maybe like a chunky chugging part rhythmically, heavier part, I'd use a bit more of a dramatic version of this, but for this I'm going to kind of dial it back a little bit. I want this guitar to be quite dry and pokey and tucked in the mix, but having a little bit of movement really helps it, and that's using the Echo Boy, which is a delay plugin, but I've used a setting called Chorus Wide Room, and the reason being is it's actually got a chorus effect and it's got a wobble, and which is basically detuning it slightly, but on a time base. So that means it isn't always staying in the same place, and the Echo Boy is just super versatile. I recommend it. And that's the guitar, so let's have a listen. Now, the next thing is the vocals, which is like the wolf kind of. If you're building a track like a pop song or disco kind of song, these kind of vocal samples often are there to add like atmosphere. They're not major parts, so they don't need to be always like really up front. So for that, the reverb I would use would be a plate reverb. A plate reverb, those of you who don't know, was an old school, way of making reverb. Basically have a massive metal plate hanging in a room with microphones, and they send the sound to reverberate that metal plate, and the microphones pick up that reverberation. This plugin by Arturia, which is a virtual version of a classic reverberation plate reverb from back in the day. I've got a setting to really wide, really long reverb, which is one of their presets called Astral Plate. So solo the sound, and I'm going to send it to that plate reverb, which I've got on bus number 2, full whack. Maybe a bit too much for this to have it fully like that, but again, blend it. One more time. %wet. And I've got an EQ after it, which is it's always a good idea. See that peak there, that EQ? That frequency is very prominent in both the sound, the source sound, and in the reverb, which means that sort of 390 hertz is now doubled up. It's a good idea to EQ that down so that you're still getting the reverb to the same level, but it's not compounding that very, very strong resonant frequency. And automatically it sounds nicer. Sense of space is really coming together. Now the next vocal sound is this kind of peaking opera sound. Different texture altogether and a longer note. For the demonstration, I want to show you a technique using delay, like a long delay that I like, which is called Replica by Native Instruments, which I like. I think I got it free, but it's got loads of really good settings, and I find that I get results that I want really quickly with it. And I've got it set to 8th notes with a feedback, it's feeding back a few times. It's got a high cut, higher frequencies are being rolled off. It's got saturation, and I've got it set to the modern setting. But it's on a ping pong setting, so it's doing left and right, basically creating that sense of space. If you hear that. That's massively high in the mix. I'm just going to blend in some of that delay. That's not that much. If I take it off, suddenly it's just like a flat sound. But that delay just adds loads of space. That's the kind of thing I want on this track. So yeah, I've got that on a bus, ping pong setting, and I know that Logic Pro does have a delay that's similar to this, but I recommend Replica. It's a good one. I use it quite a lot. That's one thing I also do quite a lot, is actually add a reverb on top of a delay. So as a bonus little trick, I would say, for the sake of this, I'm just going to use a reverb that I know really, really well, and that is the Fab Filter Reverb. So if you send that delay and then put a reverb after it, you get this. Put the mix up a bit. See that EQ there still probably needs to be brought down. That low end. Adding reverbs to your delay it's really magical. Cool, so that's that. That's the two vocal sounds. One's going to a plate reverb and one's going to a delay. And they both exist lovely in the mix and sort of. Now the bass, this is, I think I already alluded to this already, but the bass is very mono sound, just boom, boom. Sometimes that's all you want from bass. If it's a bass guitar, you might have a bit more of a kind of high-end attack on it. With synth bass or the sample bass, you often need to give it a little bit of help. Now the Echo Boy, I've already got loaded up for this guitar here, guitar 2. And I'm going to use that on the bass just to give the bass a sense of width. But let's just dial in that chorus wide and listen on headphones. That's a lot of it. If you dial that in just a tiny bit like this, that bass is no longer just coming from a single point and really dry. It's actually got some stereo feel to it if you listen in the mix. And I really like it where bass feels like it's surrounding you. It's like a nice warm blanket or something. And that is a very subtle thing. I mean, I've probably still got that a bit high, then I probably would end up in a final mix. But it's good to dial things in higher and then bring them down if you think that they're too much. At least you're getting a sense of what it's doing. So yeah. Now, one other reverb that I wanted to show you, which I use a lot, is as a digital reverb, an algorithmic reverb by Fab Filter called the Pro R. The reverb I already had used on this vocal sample, which was the plate reverb. It's, I love it. It's a very characterful reverb, and it's also, modelled on a bit of old bit of hardware, which is, if I'm doing a track that's in vintage vibes or inspired by something older, I would use that to give that character. But there's a lot more options for reverb in the digital domain, using reverbs that aren't trying to be a hardware unit. And I've got one of these here set up. So the Pro R by Fab Filter, really versatile. I've got it set up on quite a long decay, a chorusy sound, far away and very spacious. And I'm going to just send that vocal sound to this just so you can hear a very commonly used reverb in my mixes. This is the reverb on its own. And it's just really nice, really smooth, and this is the sound. So that's obviously really high in the mix, and I would still have that dialed in low. And again, I had that reverb also applied after my delay as well. And on a vocal, if you listen to a lot of contemporary pop music, there'll be reverbs on the vocals that you're not really aware of until you hear the vocal soloed or in little gaps in the song, because these reverbs are really good at blending. The Juno sound, if I wanted to go a bit further with it, send that to the modern reverb. If you listen to this, have that subtly blending in. And the room sound, if you send multiple things to that room, that's going to gel those things together and make it feel like those six sounds are existing in the same space. And that vocal, I would potentially do some panning on that. I got a plugin recently called Pan Flow. You just hit a button and it creates a panning thing, and you can change it like this. You can do whatever you want. You hit this button, it just does a random one, and that loops. But I just keep clicking until I have something that I like. Now, I would never have an auto pan effect on a lead vocal. That would just be weird. But as a layer like that, as a texture, it can have, if you've got it being sent to a reverb and that reverb is not moving anywhere, having a bit of panning going on at the dry sound, that's actually pretty cool if you listen. Like, if you listen. So loads of cool stuff going there, and these are all very common mix techniques that I use on nearly everything I do. So hopefully they've been useful. Let me know in the comments what you think, if you've got any techniques that you do yourself. This is a little disco funk track I made very quickly using Apple loops. So, it shows what you can do if you just give yourself half an hour playing around. All right, take care, guys.